I did want to start this video today by acknowledging the traditional owners of this land, the Aboriginal people in which I am filming this video today. And I pay my respects to elders past and present. Hello everyone, welcome back. I'm Meredith. And today is the second day of NAIDOC Week, which is a celebration in Australia that goes for a week of Indigenous and Torres Strait Islander people's successes, culture, history, achievements, all of that. So I thought I would do a book recommendation video for you guys this week to read during the week if you are looking for some books to read. So I'm going to start with one of my favorite authors at this point. Honestly, I've loved everything I have read by her, and that is Anita High. She's an Aboriginal author who's written a bunch of books. Her backlist is huge and I'm making my way through it. So the first book I'm going to recommend by her is Avoiding Mr Wright, and this is about a young woman who is kind of very independent. She's very career driven and she does have a partner. She's given this amazing job opportunity, but it is in another state of Australia, and she has decided she doesn't want to take her partner with her. She doesn't want to give him that option. She just says to him, I want to go alone. And so a lot of people are shocked about this, especially her partner, and they continue a long distance relationship while she kind of be's independent, works for herself and makes new relationships and kind of reflects on whether this relationship is right for her. She also meets other guys, but it's definitely more about her and her confidence and her life and her career. And I really enjoyed this. This has so many brilliant passages about being an Indigenous woman, her internal dialogue, the way that she stands up for herself and her people and her culture is just so brilliant, and I think would really inspire a lot of people. I think that she doesn't let anything like put her down. She stands up for herself and what she wants. She's a very admirable character. She wasn't perfect. I think the way she treated her partner was obviously not great, but she's definitely interesting to read about and definitely has a lot of admirable qualities. So I do highly recommend this one. It was very thought-provoking, but also just like a fun kind of, you know, women's fiction story. So I do highly recommend. And then the next book I'm recommending by her is also in the same vein and is called Titus. And this is about 4 friends who are in a book club, and it's kind of following the way that their friendship group kind of changes after an event. I don't really want to say, I think it's good to just go into this blind, but yeah, something happens with one of them and it really changes the dynamic of the group. And I loved this. I thought the women were all amazing. They're very likable. They're very flawed as well though, and complex, and the way that their dynamics work is really fascinating. And yeah, I really loved the drama. Yeah, if you like kind of drama, women's fiction, contemporary literature, I highly recommend this one. And then the last thing I'm going to recommend by her is I'm Not Racist But, which is a short collection of poems. And this is a very powerful collection of poems. They were written a few years ago when John Howard was still our Prime Minister, but it's still very relevant today, unfortunately. But I think it's very powerful. It's very accessible poetry. I haven't read a lot of poetry, but I found this very easy to understand. I could see what she was saying, and I really do think this is powerful and important. I learnt so much through this, and I feel like you can feel her anger and sorrow through the words really well, and I feel like this was written at a very vulnerable time for her. I really do think more people should read it. I really highly recommend. Now I'm going to recommend probably my favorite book by an Indigenous author. I just love this and I kind of want to reread it for NAIDOC Week, even though I have all of these books I've never read before that I need to read. It's The Boy from the Mish. This book is just, honestly, I just want to take a moment to just appreciate that this book exists. Like, I cannot believe how important I'm sure this book is to so many young gay Indigenous teens out there, and I just want to get this book out there. I think we should all support this book. We all need to support the author. He's actually working on his second book at the moment, I believe, so like we just need to really push this book out there because it's brilliant, it's so important, and it's so easy to read. It's about a teenage boy who ends up having to share his room for like the holidays with this other boy who has just gotten out of prison, and they kind of end up having a romance, and it's about him exploring his sexuality, figuring out who he is, you know, his sexual attraction. But unfortunately he is in an environment that's quite homophobic, so he's really terrified to come out to people, And at first he's quite resentful of his sexuality, but he learns that it's okay. He learns to be proud, to stand up for himself. It's beautiful, it's sweet, it's wholesome. It's also just incredibly well written, because I honestly read a lot of YA, and majority of the time they don't sound like teenagers, or they sound really forced, like you can tell it's an adult writing it. I tell you, this sounded like a teenage boy so much. Like, I remember, I don't know why, but this really irrelevant scene just sticks out in my brain, because I remember reading that like, oh my god, he like understands teenage boys. There's this scene where when the boy first comes over and it's like, he's gonna be sharing your room, one of his first thoughts is, but how am I gonna fart? Like, what do I do when I need to fart? And I'm just like, that I mean, that is just brilliant. So yeah, just if you're gonna pick up any book on this list, I kind of want it to be this one the most. I know that some of these books on this list are brilliant, but this is so important. Like, I just cannot not acknowledge how important this is. And it's just fun, and it's entertaining, and it's easy, and it's cute, and it's just important. So I highly recommend this one. And this has come out in the US as a different book, so I'll put the cover and name here. So that is this book. So these are the same book. So pick that one up. Whatever, just pick it up. It's brilliant. Then I'm going to recommend probably my second favorite book by an Indigenous author, which is The Yield by Tara June Winch. I tell you, this book made me so emotional. This is a brilliant, brilliant story that I just highly recommend everybody pick up. So this is one of those stories where a young woman goes back to her hometown. When she goes back, she finds out that they are wanting to basically start mining on this town, and the people of this town are in this battle with proving that there is cultural significance to this town, because if they can prove that, then they will not be allowed to demolish the town, because there is Indigenous cultural heritage there. And so they are trying to prove that, and the daughter comes back, and she's kind of very out of touch with her family and her history, but she really embraces that fight and really becomes passionate about her history again, because she wants to help prove that this town shouldn't be demolished and show the, you know, significant cultural history that is in this town. But it's also about her relationship with her deceased grandfather and her relationship through him with language. And one of my favorite things about this is that there is this like dictionary in this with all of these words in the language, and it's actually the dictionary of the grandfather, because the grandfather was trying to find back this language that had been lost, and he was writing a dictionary of the language of these people. And I believe throughout the story there's also passages of when the language is being used. Yeah, like it kind of has the language throughout, so you're learning the language through the story. And yeah, it definitely covers her relationship with that as well, and coming to terms with his passing and her kind of complex relationship with him. But it's so important. I was so emotional reading this. I think it's beautiful. I think it's captivating. I think it's brilliant, and I highly recommend. The next book I'm going to recommend is a non-fiction by Stan Grant, which is called Australia Day. I believe this is the only thing I've read by him so far, but he's definitely kind of a staple of Indigenous literature. He writes a lot of non-fiction. He actually had a book released last year called The Falling of the Dusk, which I really wanted to get to, but I didn't end up getting to, and I still haven't, so I'm a piece of shit. But this focuses on Australia Day and his relationship with that as an Indigenous man. I actually really need to reread this because I read it a little while ago, and I can't remember a huge bunch about the message in this. I feel like if you're not Australian, I don't know if this would be a great place to start, because I don't know if you'll really understand the cultural and historical significance of Australia Day. And I don't know how you go jumping straight into this, but I still recommend it, definitely. But I think a good place to start with Indigenous non-fiction is Remembered by Heart, which is edited by Sally Morgan, but it's an anthology of pieces written by a bunch of Indigenous people. It's about contemporary experiences, historical experiences of people and their family. It talks a lot about the stolen generation and the effect that had on people's families, the effect it still has on them today, and what a significant, you know, part of history that is, because it really just affected the Indigenous people and their culture and their knowledge of their culture so significantly. It's a really important anthology because it talks about how that really affected people now and how much culture and connection that they lost because they were taken from their families. Yeah, I highly recommend this. You're gonna be like this, but learning about how that affected Indigenous people, it's a really difficult read because some awful things happened to people during this time, but again, it's really important, and it's written, they're all by Indigenous people, so you're learning it from them, because I know a lot of non-fiction about Indigenous history is actually written by white people. So I think that this one's really important, and it's very personal, and the fact that people were so vulnerable but still chose to tell people about this is so important, and yeah, I highly recommend it. I have my last recommendation, which is one I read last month, which is This All Come Back Now, which is another anthology, and this is speculative fiction. This was wacky, this was cool, I really enjoyed this. But yeah, this just has a bunch of speculative fiction, and they're all by Indigenous authors, and this is the first anthology of speculative fiction written by Indigenous authors. Amazing. And some of this is brilliant. Some of the writing in this is so amazing. But yeah, they're just like some of them are kind of wacky, some of them are kind of scary, some of them are very moving, but it's a brilliant place to start if you're wanting to read a bunch from Indigenous authors and see like which Indigenous authors you might click with. I highly recommend this if you like anthologies or short stories. This one is just new out, it's a new release, and I highly recommend it. So yeah, that is going to do it. That is my video of recommending books by Indigenous authors. I just really recommend all of these. Literally, they're just brilliant, and it's so important, especially in Australia, but honestly everywhere, to read books by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander authors. And I think that NAIDOC Week is a great time to start if you haven't read any, but it's one of those things where it's like Pride Month. Just because it's the time doesn't mean you only read it then. You should always be reading books by Indigenous authors. It's definitely something I need to work on. I really hope that you're going to check some of this out. Definitely let me know if you are. And I would really love to know if you're like not from Australia and you're thinking of picking up some of this stuff. I'd absolutely love to know. But yeah, thank you so much for joining me today. I really hope that you enjoyed this video, and hopefully I will see you in another video very soon. But until then, bye.